ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ, ಶುಭೋದಯ. ಇಷ್ಟು ದೀರ್ಘವಾದ ಜನರಸ್ ಆದ ಇಂಟ್ರೊಡಕ್ಷನ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಂಥ ಪ್ರಸನ್ನ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಧನ್ಯವಾದ. ಹಾಗೂ ಮಿಥಿಕ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿಯವರು ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ನಡೆಸಿಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಆಯೋಜಿಸಿರೋದು ಕೂಡ ಧನ್ಯವಾದ. ಬೇಸಿಕಲಿ ನನ್ನ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಸಬ್ಮಿಷನ್ ಅಂತ ಏನಂತಾರೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ನಲ್ಲೇ ಪ್ರಿಪೇರ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಐ ಥಿಂಕ್ ವಿ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಸ್ವಿಚ್ ಓವರ್ ಟು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ. So welcome once again, and I offer my sincere thanks to Mythic Society and its organizers. It's also my great honor that a distinguished and eminent elder, a man of a scholar of multifaceted talents, an elder mentor to me, ಪೂಜ್ಯ ಶ್ರೀ ರಾಮಸ್ವಾಮಿಗಳು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಉಪಸ್ಥಿತರಿರೋದು ಭಾಳ ಸಂತೋಷ ತಂದಿದೆ. So before we begin to speak about today's topic, which is Moplah Hatyakanda, let's take a quick overview, historical overview of what led to the Moplah event. And I have divided my lecture into 4 or 5 broad categories. First, I'll begin by giving a quick historical backdrop, and then I'll give you a brief overview of the kind of things that occurred during the colonial British era in the larger backdrop of World War I. And then we come to see a few facets of the Indian freedom struggle, and particularly the role played by Mohandas Gandhi. And finally, I'll give some details of the Moplah genocide and the lessons that we as Hindus, we as Indians should always remember, keep in mind. So the first thing to note about today's topic is to correctly call it by its real name. For the longest time, this event has been wrongly represented as the Moplah Rebellion, as popular history books tell us. But the correct name of what happened 1 century ago, exactly 101 years ago, was a Moplah genocide of Hindus. And I'll repeat that, it was a Moplah genocide of Hindus, which brings us to the term Moplah. What is the origin of this term? The English pronunciation, the English term Moplah, what is known as Moplah, is a corruption of the word Mapilla, which both in Tamil and Malayalam means son-in-law, aliya, damad. So their origins can be traced to the 8th or 9th century, that period, where Kerala's Malabar coast had thriving trade links with the Arabs. And over the centuries, with as the trade expansion and business interactions occurred with Arabs, some Malabar Hindus were forcibly converted to Islam, and in many other cases, Arab merchants who had been settled in Malabar, they married local Hindu women. And so this is how they got this name Mapilla or Moplah. And over the course of the time, the Arabs lost their hold over trade, all thanks to Portuguese. And the kind of wars that the Arabs here, or the Moplahs here, fought with Portuguese is the stuff of legends, and neither side painted themselves in glory. So after they lost their trading prowess and their hold over trade, over control over trade, by the 18th or 19th century, the Mapillas, they had lost their wealth and status as merchants and respectable people in society, and they were reduced to becoming mercenaries for hire. Some of them worked for Hindu zamindars. They did all kinds of work in the fields. They did manual labor and other kinds of odd jobs. And during Tipu Sultan's destructive raid on Malabar, he forcibly took thousands of Mapillas and resettled them in Coorg, and artificially created a demographic imbalance in Kodagu. And even today, these people in Coorg are known as Kodava Mapillas, in spite of the fact that there is no word called Mapilla in either Kannada or the Kodava language. And so by the 19th century, The Mapillas, because they were mercenaries and thugs and gundas basically, they had become a recurring source of trouble for Malabar Hindus living in villages and towns like Kannanur and Calicut and other places. And regularly these Moplahs used to raid and plunder and kidnap Hindu women and pretty much commit all sorts of atrocities. And the colonial British administration, it kept a close watch on these Moplahs, especially during a period known as the Mapilla outbreak, and this lasted roughly for a century, beginning with around 1836 and ending in 1921, which is a precise year of the Moplah genocide of Hindus. So I don't think the word, what kind of an outbreak is it which lasts for more than a century? So you see how the narrative gets shifted, and I'll come to all that as we go on. So this brief historical background, I think, sets the context for today's discussion, and we can directly jump into the topic. The year is 1918, and the First World War, which pretty much consumed the whole world, it was almost ending. And one of the most important milestones that marked the end of the First World War was something called the Armistice of Mudros, which was signed on 30th October 1989. Mudros is a small town in Greece, and it used to enjoy a great prestige as one of the important naval bases during the war. And this Armistice of Mudros, a treaty, it marked the end of the war between the Allied forces on one side and the Ottoman Empire in Turkey. And one of the most important conditions of this treaty, Armistice of Mudros, was the partitioning of the Turkish Ottoman Empire, also known as the Turkish Caliphate. The actual partition of the Ottoman Empire, it occurred in something called the Treaty of Sèvres, which was signed in August 1920 in a porcelain factory in France. And after this treaty, it created and it gave rise to new independent nation states, which are all familiar to us today as Syria, Lebanon and Yemen. And with the conclusion of this treaty, the 400-year-old long Turkish Caliphate, what is also known as the Ottoman Empire, it came to a complete end. Basically, it was destroyed. And Sultan Muhammad VI, who was the Caliph, he was allowed to simply retain his position and his title, but he was virtually powerless. Politically, he had nothing. And meanwhile, what had happened in the Turkish society because of that was that the Turks as a people, they saw the Treaty of Sèvres as a national humiliation, and they directed the anger at the Caliph. And the Caliph panicked, obviously, and he abdicated the throne. He put his cousin, Abdul Majid, and declared him as a Caliph or the Khalifa. But what happened was that this completely backfired against the Caliph, because by that time, with the death of the Ottoman Empire, the entire Muslim world, which includes Arabs and Egypt in Africa, they had completely rejected the Caliph's authority, and this is really where our story begins. Now, naturally, the abolition of the Ottoman Caliphate, it caused a massive shock in the most unlikeliest place on the earth, India. And India, which was then the colony of the British Empire, and more specifically, even within India, it caused panic in a highly influential section of Indian Muslims, who are known as Ashrafs. To this class, to this Muslim elite, it was as if the earth had just opened up under them and swallowed them, and the sky was falling on their head. And this is where it becomes important for all of us to have a sense of history, because there is no bigger error than looking at history in isolation or in a fragmented fashion. Our sense of history must be integrated, it must be continuous and unbroken in order to make sense of both the past and the present, and maybe draw lessons for the future. But in the present context, this sense of history reveals an important truth. The importance of the caliphate for the Indian Muslims of those days. So we need to ask this question. Why was the caliphate so important to Indian Muslims even when the entire Muslim world in Arabia and Egypt, when that world had itself rejected the caliphate so thoroughly? Why did this Ashraf section, why did this Indian Muslim elite section treat it with such, why were they so horrified and depressed? So the answer to this question dates back all the way to the invasion of Muhammad bin Qasim and all the successive waves of alien Muslim invaders who established their own kingdoms in India, all the way up to Aurangzeb and Tipu Sultan. Without exception, all Muslim sultans in India swore loyalty to the caliph or the khalifa, and for at least 6 centuries, every Muslim sultan and nawab, whatever they are, nizam, they used to send annual tributes to Turkey. And some of these sultans also minted coins in India which bore the name of the caliph's name. So the caliph or the khalifa played a central role in the Muslim ummah, which means global Muslim brotherhood. This is because he was not only a political leader of Turkey or some empire. He was not only that, as a political leader, as a political head, he upheld Allah's empire in the world, but Caliph was also seen as a religious protector and enforcer of Islam in the world. So the term Khalifa or Caliph means that he is the Khalifa of Islam and not just the Khalifa of the Ottoman Turks. And coming back to India, after the Mughal Empire was destroyed, the Muslim leadership in India, it noticed with great sadness that this grand project of Islamizing all of Hindustan was systematically coming apart. And even to this day, in both India and Pakistan, in the Muslim community, the lament is the death of the Muslim Empire, Mughal Empire. In fact, one of the tactics that the British had used to keep the loyalty of Muslims to their side was to convince them that they, the Muslims, are the real rulers of Hindustan, and we, British, we are keeping your lost Islamic empire safe, protecting it from, the evil Hindus. So, once the Ottoman Caliphate was closed, it also made the Indian Muslim elite nervous and angry, and they decided to do something about it. So in 1919, a man named Muhammad Ali Jauhar, he led a delegation of Indian Muslims to London. He took a petition with him. It was not a petition, it was actually a demand. He went to the British government, took the petition and said, you have to restore the caliphate. Obviously, his demand was thrown into dustbin. But from this rejection, something also happened. Muhammad Ali set up something called the Khilafat Committee. The demand of the Khilafat Committee was straightforward. It was a complete boycott and a protest against the British government of India until the caliphate was restored. And so it is clear that from the very beginning, there was nothing nationalistic, there was nothing patriotic or Indian about the Khilafat movement. Its ultimate goal was to serve a pan-Islamic cause, and all means, all techniques, all propaganda, all tactics were valid. This is a brief story of how the so-called Khilafat movement began. And Muhammad Ali Jauhar, along with his elder brother, Shaukat Ali Jauhar, they popularly came to be known as the Ali brothers, and they planned, led and executed the Khilafat movement from the front. Muhammad Ali was a founder and president of the All India Muslim League. And both Ali brothers, they played a central role in expanding the influence of the Aligarh Muslim University and the Jamia Millia Islamia. Both of these institutions are still standing today in North India, and they command a huge influence. So when the Ali brothers launched the Khilafat Committee, their authority was nearly unchallenged in the Indian Muslim community. But then The Ali brothers also spent 2 frustrating years from 1919 to 1921 trying to enlist nationwide support for the Khilafat committee, and they didn't have too much of a success, but suddenly unconditional support came from unexpected quarters. This support exactly transformed the Khilafat committee into the Khilafat movement, and the name of this support was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Now, Gandhi's support was like a booster dose for the Khilafat movement. Muhammad Ali now had the support not only of the Muslim community, but a significant section of the Hindu community who innocently but blindly trusted Gandhi's words, thinking that they were actually supporting the Indian freedom struggle against the British. And some of the stuff that Gandhi said in praise of Muhammad Ali, it reads like a steamy romantic novel. And I'll give you just one example. So Gandhi writes, and I quote, "When I met Maulana Muhammad Ali, it was love at first sight." So, it's quite disgusting. I'll skip the details anyway. Now, Gandhi was thinking that all the while he was using Muhammad Ali to achieve the mythical Hindu-Muslim unity, but Muhammad Ali, both Shaukat and Muhammad Ali, he was very clear about his objectives from day one. It was obviously a restoration of the caliphate. What he did, even while he was Gandhige benne hachi nanu kuda non-violent nodi namdu Allahnu onde nimdu ke Ramanu onde anta ee tara benne hachta simultaneously he kept the Muslim community in a state of preparedness for war, and he had developed a extensive network of all sorts of Muslim Islamic clergy, including imams, Maulanas, mullahs, and all these preachers throughout the country. Remember, we are talking about undivided India. From Lahore, from Karachi to Malabar, the message, the intent was absolutely clear. Be prepared for aggression at any time. And the level of planning and the precise steps for its execution was truly extraordinary. And beginning in the summer of 1920, the Ali brothers launched a series of conferences and seminars and meetings and began giving highly provocative public speeches addressed to the Muslim community to restore the Khilafat. I'll give you a couple of examples to illustrate this. March 1920. The location is Malegaon, Maharashtra. Remember the Malegaon blast? So there's a reason we should read history. So in Malegaon, in the town, a branch of the Khilafat committee was already formed, and a body of volunteers was actively working for, restoration of the Khilafat. And this branch of its activities were divided into two parts. First, a series of waza or Islamic sermons had to be done almost on a daily basis, especially during the Friday so-called prayers. Second, enlisting door-to-door support for the Khilafat movement, and both step 1 and step 2 were extraordinarily successful. And when the resident magistrate of Malegaon, his name was Mr. Thakkar, he noticed the violent atmosphere that the Muslim community was deliberately creating over the past few months. So Mr. Thakkar, he convicted 6 Islamic preachers on April 25th, 1920. The moment these guys were convicted and put into jail, I'll read out what happened next. A Muslim mob quickly collected and gave vent to their feelings by loud cries of Allahu Akbar. This was a war cry used by the mob throughout the riot. Muslims assaulted all the police to be found in the town of Malegaon. It burned a temple, killed a sub-inspector of police, and threw his body into the fire and looted the houses of all those who were opposed to Khilafat movement. And all the Hindu owners had fled the town in the meantime. KG Halli, DG Halli. Anybody remembers? Same thing. So after Malegaon, the same thing repeated in Barabanki, which is in Uttar Pradesh, where the Hindu community was specifically targeted. It was brutally ravaged. Again, shops were looted, houses were burned, men were slaughtered, and women were raped. The idea on the part of Ali brothers behind all this was to keep the fire burning continuously. And in one speech, extremely violent speech, Muhammad Ali said as follows: if the Afghans invaded India to wage a holy war, the Indian Mohammedans are not only bound to fight them, but also to fight the Hindus if they refuse to cooperate with them. Tipu Sultan Zaman Shah, Afghanistan, bardid ide letter. Now, Shaukat Ali, Tipu Sultan andre gyapka bantu. Shaukat Ali travelled far down to no other place than Srirangapatna. He visited Tipu's Dargah and made a speech, and I quote, "We have come here to Srirangapatna on a pious pilgrimage. It includes a visit and a prayer at the sacred grave of Tipu Sultan. He is our national hero." I can give many other examples, but we'll move on to the next event. So, which is the Khilafat conference, which was held in Karachi on July 9th, 1921. In a public speech, Muhammad Ali, he gave a call to all Muslim soldiers serving in the British Army or Indian Army, and this is what he told them, and I quote, "This meeting clearly proclaims that it is in every way unlawful for a Mussalman to continue in the British Army or to ask other Mussalmans to join the army. It is a duty of all Mussalmans in general and the ulemas in particular to see that Islamic religious commandments are brought home to every Mussalman in the army, and to declare an independent Muslim republic after the Congress session in December 1921 in Ahmedabad." He would not get it. Jinnah would get the independent Muslim state. So the British also kept a continuous watch, kept a tight vigilance on the activities of the Ali brothers. And after this speech, the government put both Ali brothers in jail, and the judge who sentenced them said the following words in his verdict: "Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali maintained, first, that their religion compels them to do certain acts. Second, that no law which restrains them from doing those acts which their religion compels them to do has any validity." Which means all Muslims are not bound to follow the law of the land because they are made by infidels. So the message was clear. The Ali brothers told the Muslim community that you have to follow only the law of Allah and not laws made by human beings. And while all this was happening, should we really believe that Mohandas Gandhi was unaware of this unprovoked massacre of Hindus across such a vast geography? Lahore, Karachi, Barabanki, Malegaon, everywhere, right? So should we seriously believe that he was unaware of this? So what was Gandhi doing all this while? Answer: he was busy chasing the mirage called Hindu-Muslim unity at any cost. In speech after speech, in article after article, he praised the Ali brothers. He parroted their lies about the Khilafat movement. And I'll quote C. Shankaran Nair, who was an eyewitness of that era. Shankaran Nair was one of the staunchest critics of Gandhi, and it's unfortunate that of late his works are seeing the limelight again. But for about 75-80 years, many people had not even heard his name. Anyway, this is what he says. So far as Gandhi was concerned, the position is quite clear. He puts forward whichever is the most extreme demand made by the Khilafat party without inquiry into the reasonableness. In applying the gospel of non-violence to practical politics, he has shown himself a babe in the woods and his interference has generally been mischievous. I am satisfied that he is using all of them to further his own ends. It is an attempt in which he is bound to fail. Close quote. And history has shown how accurate Shankaran Nair was. And in fact, Gandhi went so far as to say that he fully supported the Ali brothers' cause of the Muslim Ummah and urged Hindus to support them. And Gandhi also said that Palestine must be incorporated into Turkey, which had itself lost its caliph. Okay, his genius is beyond human comprehension. So, in the context of the Khilafat movement, Gandhi laid down the following conditions to be followed exclusively by Hindus. Condition 1. Don't insist on the prohibition of cow slaughter by Muslims. 2. Abandon Hindi. Learn Hindustani or Urdu or Farsi. Condition number 3. Do not carry processions in front of mosques. Condition number 4. Do not play bhajans or religious music if it offends Muslims. Condition 5. If Muslims attack you unprovoked, submit to them by courageous appeals to the goodness of their heart. Do not retaliate. This is the condition. So basically, Gandhi's support to the so-called Khilafat movement can be captured in one sentence. No matter how outrageous it was, Hindus had to meekly, blindly accept every single outrageous demand of the Muslims. And let me say it bluntly, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was directly responsible for the Moplah genocide of Hindus in Malabar. Now we get to the actual event, which is the genocide of Hindus in Malabar. The arrest of the Ali brothers was exactly what the Ali brothers wanted, and it had the desired impact. All the planning that they had done for 2.5 years, it was racing towards a kind of a climax. The Muslim violence that had begun in Malegaon, then spread to Barabanki, now spread to Bengal, Bihar, Punjab, and reached its most savage climax in Malabar. But there is a slight flashback to this. So even as Gandhi was coaxing and encouraging Hindus to support the so-called Khilafat movement, the Hindus in Malabar were not fooled. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this lecture, the Malabar Hindus had centuries worth of experience in actually living with the Moplah Muslims, who were notorious for unprovoked violence, kidnapping of women, setting fire to houses and villages, plundering Hindu settlements and so on. And the Moplahs followed the lead of their Muslim brothers elsewhere in India. And they thought that the Malabar Hindus could be bullied, they could be frightened to support their Khilafat cause. But the Hindus who understood the basic psyche and had the experience of living with these guys for so long, they refused to support the so-called Khilafat movement. But what was worse, they had badly miscalculated in the sense that they naively trusted, they innocently believed that the Moplahs would carry on their so-called Khilafat struggle independently without involving them. But the moment Hindus refused, the Moplahs saw that this refusal was a perfect excuse to launch a savage, all-out war against Hindus, not against British. The British had destroyed the so-called caliphate. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕೇರಳದ ಹಿಂದೂರು ಏನು ಕ್ಯಾಲಿಫೇಟ್ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಇರಿಸಿದ್ದ. So they found this as a perfect excuse to declare war, and the speeches and inflammatory pamphlets of the Ali brothers and other mullahs and Khilafat leaders, they were being circulated and read out in mosques and madrasas in Malabar. all this had to come to a logical end, a brutal end. Throughout, the Moplahs were armed and ready. They had swords and guns and machetes and knives and daggers in their houses and mosques, and unfortunately for the innocent, unarmed Hindus in Malabar, they were not sufficiently on guard. They were not sufficiently equipped with arms, and on 20th of August 1921, the first fire was lit. What happened after that does not make for easy reading. The Moplah genocide of Malabar Hindus was a nightmare that lasted continuously for 2 months without a break. Every single day, sometimes multiple times in a single day. So I'll give you a brief list of the main features that occurred throughout this brutal genocide, and then we look at some precise details of the actual nature and the extent of this barbarism. Savage rape, dishonor, slaughter and slavery of Hindu women, flaying Hindus alive, which means skinning them alive, wholesale slaughter of men, women, children and even infants, forcibly converting both Hindu men and women on a large scale, or killing those who refuse to convert, throwing half-dead people into wells with no chance to escape. ಆಳವಾದ ಬಾವಿಲಿ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಕುಯ್ದುಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆಳವಾದ ಬಾವಿಲಿ ತಳ್ಳಿಬಿಟ್ಟು ಅವ್ರು ಸಾಯೋವರೆಗೂ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಇರಬೇಕು. ಸೊ ದೇ ವುಡ್ ಬ್ಲೀಡ್ ಟು ಡೆತ್, ಲಿಟ್ರಲಿ, ಹ್ಯಾವಿಂಗ್ ನೋ ಮೀನ್ಸ್ ಟು climb out of the well. Burning and looting practically all Hindu and Christian houses, and in this act, even Moplah women and children took part. And if this was not enough, they robbed Muslim women. They stripped off the clothes that Hindu women were wearing on their bodies, and in short, reducing the whole non-Muslim population into abject poverty. Then the other common feature, destroying and desecrating numerous temples, killing cows within the temple compound, within the temple's premises, pulling out their intestines and placing them on the murtis, devata murtigalige adanna harad tara haki, hanging the skulls of the dead cows on the walls and roofs of temples. So these are the major features. Now I will read out a verbatim quote of just 2 personal eyewitness accounts, so that you have a clear idea of the savage nature, of the scale and the sheer extent of the Moplah genocide of Malabar Hindus. The first narrative is by Annie Besant. She visited the various sites of the genocide, and she wrote a report. She organized relief camps for the victims. So she made an extensive tour, and she strongly condemns Gandhi's role in causing it, and I'll read out a couple of extracts. Mr. Gandhi. Can Mr. Gandhi not feel a little sympathy for thousands of women left with only rags, driven from home? Can't his heart melt for the little children born of the flying mothers on roads and refugee camps? The misery is beyond description. Girl wives, young, pretty and sweet, with their eyes gone half blind by weeping continuously, distraught with horror. Women who have seen their husbands hacked to pieces before their eyes in the way that the Moplahs consider as pious. Old women tottering, whose faces became written with anguish and who cry at a gentle touch. Men who have lost everything, hopeless, crushed, desperate. Can you conceive of a more ghastly and inhuman crime than the murders of babies and pregnant women? A pregnant woman carrying 7 months was cut through the abdomen by a Moplah, and she was seen lying dead on the way with the dead child projecting out of her womb. Another, a baby of 6 months was snatched away from the breast of his own mother and cut into 2 pieces. Are these Moplahs human beings or monsters? A respectable Nair lady at Melatur was stripped naked by the Moplahs in the presence of her husband and brothers, who were made to stand close by with their hands tied behind them. When they shut their eyes in abhorrence, they were compelled at the point of the sword to open their eyes and witness the rape and torture committed by the brutes in their presence. And the second episode, it's a very it's a very heart-wrenching appeal written by the Maharani of Nilambur, and it was a petition signed by hundreds of Hindu women from Malabar and elsewhere. It was addressed to Lady Reading, who was the wife of Reading, the Viceroy of India back then. And I'll read out a couple of experts. If you want the full text, it's available on Dharma Dispatch. So the contents of this letter will melt even a stone. So close your eyes and visualize the scene. Here it is. The present Moplah rebellion is unexampled in its magnitude as well as unprecedented in its ferocity. The horrors and atrocities perpetrated by the fiendish Muslims of the many wells and tanks filled up with the mutilated but only half-dead bodies of our nearest and dearest ones who refused to abandon the faith of our ancestors, of pregnant women cut into pieces and left on the roadsides and in the jungles, with the unborn babies protruding from the mangled corpse, of our innocent and helpless children torn from our arms and beaten to death before our own eyes, and our husbands and fathers tortured, skinned alive and burnt alive, of our helpless sisters forcibly carried away from the midst of their kith and kin and subjected to every shame and outrage which the vile and brutal imagination of these inhuman hellhounds could conceive of thousands of our homes reduced to cinder mounds out of sheer savagery and a wanton spirit of destruction, of our places of worship desecrated and destroyed, and the images of our deities shamefully insulted by putting the entrails of slaughtered cows where flower garlands once used to be placed, or else smashed to pieces, the wholesale looting of hard-earned wealth of generations, reducing many who were formerly rich and prosperous to publicly beg for a piece or two on the streets of Calicut, either to buy salt or chili or betel leaf. These are not stories. The wells are full of rotting skeletons, the ruins which once were our dear homes, the heaps of stones which once were our places of worship. These are all still standing as witnesses to attest to the truth. The cries of our murdered children in their death agonies are still ringing in our ears, and they will continue to haunt our memory till only death can bring us peace. We remember how, driven out of our native hamlets, we wandered starving and naked in the jungles and forests. We remember how we choked and stifled our babies' mouths, lest the sound should betray our hiding places to our relentless pursuers. We still vividly realize the moral and spiritual agony the thousands of us passed through when we were forcibly converted into the faith professed by these bloodthirsty miscreants. Our most unhappy sisters, who were born and brought up in respectable families, have now been forcibly converted and then married to convicts. Close quote. There's some 50 pages of this. This is not even 1% what I've written. But you know what is even worse than the actual genocide of Malabar Hindus? It is the heartless response, savage response by the non-violent Gandhi and his Congress party. It was Gandhi's ultimate act of desecrating, of spitting even on the dead bodies of the innocent Hindus of Malabar. he forced the Congress party to pass a resolution in the Ahmedabad session of December 1921. Remember Ahmedabad session, the warning that Muhammad Ali had given about the Congress session of December 1921. I'll read out the resolution that Gandhi forced the party to pass. The Congress expresses its firm conviction that the Moplah disturbance was not due to the known non-cooperation or the Khilafat movement. It is due to causes wholly unconnected with the movement, and that the violence would not have occurred had the message of non-violence been allowed to reach them. Seriously. Nevertheless, this Congress is of the opinion that the disturbance in Malabar could have been prevented by the government of Madras if it had accepted the assistance offered by Maulana Yaqub Hasan. Close quote. Who is Maulana Yaqub Hasan? He was the same Yaqub Hasan, one of the Ashraf landed Muslim elite. He was the same guy. He is a Maulana, which means a religious teacher in Islam. The same man who continuously gave out the kind of speeches that the Ali brothers gave, supporting the so-called Khilafat movement. Gandhi and his Congress did not have a single word to condemn either the Ali brothers or the entire gang of the Khilafat supporters. And it is interesting to read, ನಾವು ಕನ್ನಡದವರೇ ಆಗಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಡಿ ವಿ ಜಿ ಅವರು ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತುಂಬ ಕಂಡೆಮ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಒಂದು ಆರ್ಟಿಕಲ್ ಬರೆದಿದ್ರು, ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ ಐ ಥಿಂಕ್. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ತುಂಬ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಆರ್ಟಿಕಲ್ ಅದು. ಐ ಥಿಂಕ್ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಅವೈಲಬಲ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಆರ್ಕೈವ್ಸ್, ಸೊ ಯು ಶುಡ್ ರೀಡ್ ದ್ಯಾಟ್. ಸೊ ಆನ್ ದೇರ್ ಪಾರ್ಟ್, neither the Ali brothers nor the other Khilafat leaders had any sympathy for the genocide of Malabar Hindus by the Moplahs. ಒಬ್ಬನೇ ಒಬ್ಬ ಇಸ್ಲಾಮಿಕ್ ಲೀಡರ್ ಕೂಡ ಈ ಮೋಪ್ಲಾಗಳ ಹತ್ಯಾಕಾಂಡ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ, ಹಿಂದೂಗಳು ನರಮೇಧ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ, ಒಬ್ಬನೂ ಬೈಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಇನ್ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ದೇ ಜಸ್ಟಿಫೈಡ್ ಇಟ್. I'll give you a small sample of the kind of disgusting justification that was given by another great Muslim leader, Hasrat Mohani. So he called for a Muslim League conference, and in that conference he publicly said that the Moplah Muslims massacred Hindus because they were frightened of an English detachment, which is an army unit, in the locality, and they assumed that the Hindus had invited the army. Bare-faced, naked, shameless lie. And I'll also give you one small anecdote about this fellow Hasrat Mohani. After independence, the great Nehruvian secular establishment honored Hasrat Mohani as a freedom fighter. As recent as February 2014, our former great Vice President, Mr. Hamid Ansari, he released a postage stamp in the honor of Hasrat Mohani. I'll let you draw your own conclusions about, where we have all reached. And meanwhile, the great apostle of non-violence, Satyagraha, Gandhi, he faced enormous condemnation, obviously, for being single-handedly being responsible for the Moplah genocide of Malabar Hindus, and a group of courageous Hindus in Kerala. I'll read out their names: K.P. Keshava Menon, Madhavan Nair, T.V. Muhammad, K. Karunakara Menon, and K.V. Gopala Menon. So they wrote an open letter to Gandhi, and I'll just read out a couple of sentences from that. Truth is infinitely of more paramount importance than Hindu-Muslim unity or Swaraj. And therefore, we tell Maulana Hasrat Mohani and his co-religionists and India's revered leader, Mahatma Gandhi, if he really is unaware of the events here, that the atrocities committed by the Moplahs on the Hindus are unfortunately absolutely true, and that there is nothing in the actions of the Moplah Muslims which a true non-violent person can congratulate them for. What is it for which they deserve our congratulations? Their wanton and unprovoked attack on the Hindus, the wholesale looting of their houses in Ernad, Valluvanad, Ponnani and Calicut, the forcible conversions of Hindus in many places. In the beginning of the outbreak, the wholesale conversion of those who stuck to their homes in later stages, the brutal murder of inoffensive Hindus, men, women and children and babies in cold blood, without the slightest reason except that they are kafirs. The desecration and burning of Hindu temples, the outrage on Hindu women, and their forcible conversion and marriage by Moplahs. Do these atrocities prove beyond doubt by the statements recorded by us from the actual sufferers who have survived, deserve any congratulations? Did the Moplahs who committed these atrocities sacrifice their lives in the cause of the nation? Close quote. And now I think we can conclude with a couple of remarks. Why is none of this history taught to our children? In fact, how many educated adults are even aware of this history? This is actually recent history. The Babar Kaladalla, Aurangzeb Kaladalla, Muhammad bin Qasim Kaladalla. Just 100 years back this occurred. Neighboring state. In the 5 hours journey. So, like I said, this year marks completion of a full dark century of the genocide of Malabar Hindus. What has happened to Hindus that they seem to be stuck in a permanent state of civilizational amnesia about their own ancestors who sacrificed so much but expected nothing in return except to continue their dharma, their ancestral way of lives and customs and manners and the traditions? These might come across as strong words, but these are not my words. They are the mere echo of what this letter says, that truth is infinitely more paramount importance than Hindu-Muslim unity or Swarajya. And I'll take a couple of minutes before concluding this whole thing. With a very, very moving account, again given by Annie Besant. She says, 2 Pulayas, who are known as Dalits today. So 2 Pulayas, the lowest of the submerged classes, were captured by Muslims with others of their community and given the choice between Islam and death. These, the people on the lowest rungs of Hinduism, of Hindu society, the untouchables, they loved their Hinduism so much that they chose to die as Hindus rather than to live as Muslims. Close quote. And 68 years later, the Moplah genocide of Hindus would repeat far away in North India, in Kashmir Valley, with the same consequences. But this time, unfortunately, the genocide of the Kashmiri Hindus happened under the actual watch of the government of independent India, and its contemporary history, which is not more than 30 years, has been buried before our own eyes. And with that I conclude my speech, and I once again offer my heartfelt gratitude to Mythic Society and all the organizers, to Shri Manjunath Ajampura, to Shri Prasanna and all of you in the audience. Namaste.